Hi, everybody. David Nour, along with Randy Seidl, back with you for another Tech Sales Insight live stream. We're delighted today to welcome Ed Sim of Boldstart Ventures. Hello, Randy.
Hey, Nour, thanks so much. And definitely excited to have Ed here. As a reminder, this is a weekly Tech Sales Insights podcast with all kinds of great sales and venture and tech kind of executive leaders. And for those that don't know, Sales Community, it's salescommunity.com. Great place to go check out to learn more, to sell more, individual contributors on up to CROs and CEOs. And look forward to this for sure. And Ed, I'm sure you're going to introduce us to your dog.
Oh yeah, this is Sparky. He's the chief revenue officer, and he's just hanging out, making sure they don't do anything stupid, and offer some bad contractual terms.
That's awesome. So joking aside, Ed, for those that may not know as much about you, can you just recap? And we talked about this on the podcast, but tell us a little about your background and a little about Boldstart.
Yeah, so I've been a VC since 1996. It's 25 years and counting, doing early stage enterprise software investing. I started Boldstart in 2010 with the idea to partner with technical founders, reinventing the enterprise stack at the very beginning, like literally no product, slide deck, technical vision, and helping them kind of do everything to kind of become real CEOs, right? A lot of times it's you can call yourself CEO, but learning all the different things you need to do from sales, hiring people, building a culture is really important. So fast forward, we've been fortunate to invest in a number of companies from the very beginning who are now like unicorns right now. So I know that we were introduced by our good friend Peter McKay at Snyk, who's CEO of Snyk, and that company is worth close to $3 billion right now. We funded it when it was just a slide deck and an idea. BigID also is a unicorn, and then Kustomer in the customer support space was announced that they're being bought by Facebook for a rumored $1 billion. So those would be some examples of SaaS and developer-first infrastructure companies that we've been investing in.
How many active portfolio companies right now?
We typically only invest in 20 per fund. So I'd probably say, 35 or 40. There's been a number of acquisitions and other things. But yeah, it's probably 35 or 40 kind of companies in the overall portfolio.
Seidl, let me go to you. What's the biggest mistake tech-led founders make when it comes to kind of their products, their go-to-market? And then I'm going to ask Ed the same question. But I know you see a lot of really interesting early stage tech companies as well.
Yeah, so I'll obviously focus on the sales side, and I'm sure it's going to be in violent agreement, but I think it's really focusing on the kind of early customers, kind of what are their needs, what's the value prop, why should they do it? A lot of people get kind of very caught up in strategic partnerships and kind of all this other stuff, which if it works is great, but that's a real long shot. I'd rather companies focus in the first, kind of 6-12 months, just get, end user customers, get the right customers, get ones that are going to do testimonials, ones that have the right value props that you can kind of leverage and springboard from there. If you don't, then you're probably going to be in a lot of trouble and be doing a down round as opposed to an up round. And then making sure that profile of that sales professional, if they're, maybe it's a player that's going to be a coach, but they really need to have some startup DNA. They just can't be a big company person that's used to kind of, a lot of help. And I'll turn over to Ed, see what your thoughts are.
Yeah, Ed, your thoughts on the biggest mistakes they make very early on, technical founders.
Yeah, so I'll concur with Randy, and I'll add two. The one thing that is the most important, especially when you're funding companies when there's no product, is the idea that product and go-to-market go hand in hand. So for example, if you're building up a bottom-up motion, then you better have the easiest onboarding process possible where there's zero friction for someone to sign up. And then you better start thinking about what that expansion capability looks like down the line. And vice versa. If you're going top down with a heavy, $500K, $1 million price tag, then you better make sure that you're all enterprise ready when you kind of sell to these large companies, right? Which means having kind of single sign-on and, all the data protection rules that you may need. So I think that thinking has to be built from the very beginning. And then second thing I would say is that you have to have the ability to zoom in. I would rather have founders talk about user journeys and user personas than customers. I don't know what a customer is. A user uses a product, and if a user doesn't love your product, it doesn't matter if you sell $1 million contract, it's going to be churned out very quickly. So focus on the user, and then focus on 10 users, then 100.
One of the interesting things that you said in our conversation on the podcast this morning is you're increasingly betting on the whole developer community. And you said there's a lot of technology. People that focus on developers are shifting that technology to the left. Talk a little about where that comes from and why do you believe the developer community's got a great deal of potential?
Yeah, I mean, I'd see a couple trends. Great question. I'm a big believer that if you win the hearts and minds of developers, then you win the hearts and minds of enterprises. I think even particularly during COVID, I think both of you had the experience. You're selling these large deals, 250K and above. You need multiple signatures, the ability to go on premise to install things and all. It just creates a lot of friction. And engineers and the rise of open source has been incredible. I mean, look at companies that are out there right now, like Elasticsearch, which is public. Look at Twilio. That's a completely developer-led motion that turns into enterprise. Mm-hmm. That was unheard of 10 years ago. You can make money selling to developers. And I'll give you the best example of Snyk that you both know as well. Guy Pajarny, when he started the company, had the vision to have and create developer-friendly security. And most people were like, what the hell is developer-friendly security? Developers don't want security because it slows them down, right? So the whole idea was, how do you help them kind of find the vulnerabilities before it gets put into production? And then how do you help them fix it? It's the equivalent of, buying a car. Imagine having a car and shipping out thousands of cars and there's a recall. That's expensive as hell and just a black eye in the face. Imagine finding that before it even gets shipped out into production. That's what shift left is. So we believe every industry is primed to shift left. I mean, even Palo Alto Networks last week in their earnings call, they're kind of a top-down sale. You both know Palo Alto quite well. Their CEO, Nikesh, was talking about kind of the importance of developers. Satya, in his opening transcript, every single time that Satya from Microsoft talks about Microsoft, and within the first 3 paragraphs, he talks about the number of developers and how they're winning the hearts and minds of developers. This is just the beginning.
For our audience that might be joining us live on various channels, feel free to jump in. Ed and Randy both see a lot of really interesting tech startups. And if you have questions of industry sectors or roles, or this would be a great panel to jump in and get your questions answered. Seidl, let me go to you. The two competing ideas, regardless of the sector, right? They've identified similar challenges, similar opportunities. What do you believe sets one as they begin to execute? And Ed said, first customer leads to 5 leads to 10. As they believe to execute, what are you seeing as setting one apart versus the other?
Well, I guess I don't know if it's a given that they've got an experienced team that's kind of been there, done that. They may not have necessarily worked well together, but at least kind of on their own a la carte parts. And it's not that anybody that's net new that's really passionate about it can't do it, but certainly there is something to be said for experience. And then ultimately, I think depending upon you've kind of a lot of motions, but there's the PLG motion, which I'll probably talk about some, and then the top down like a Palo Alto. But ultimately, it's if it's a PLG, you probably have to make it, as you said, frictionless, kind of very easy. And no matter what, whether it's a big $1 million plus enterprise sell or something that's free, there's got to be some value add in terms of why somebody's going to want to use it. And more specifically, in the enterprise side, I always say if you're in an elevator, you bump into the CFO. What are you going to say in 30 seconds that says in terms of how you're going to help them generate revenue, save money, get a competitive advantage, stay out of jail if it's compliance oriented, and it's not 50 slides of some mumbo jumbo. It's short and succinct.
Ed, let me ask you the same. You're looking at 2 really interesting technical developers who are going after the same market. Early on, do you have some perceptions of what's going to set one apart from the others?
Yeah, I would say one is I've talked about before, the ability to zoom in. I've seen technical developers come at me and say, hey, I'm selling to the CISO or I'm selling to these large Fortune 500s. And then when you actually understand and kind of dive into actually what the product is, it kind of gets lost in translation. So, they're not understanding, they don't have the customer and user empathy. And then the other person talks about, let me tell you something. I've been doing this for 10 years and this is the pain that I've experienced multiple times over the last few years. And I can't stop thinking about it. And I'm an engineer. So and what engineers do, they actually solve problems. They fix things. They build things. And so having that user empathy from the very beginning, a great founder, by the way, that both of you know as well, is a guy named Alex Yampolsky, who Bill Hogan is CRO, and he's part of your community. But Alex was a CISO before he started Security Scorecard. And he was tired of filling out vendor risk questionnaires. And he asked the question, what if I could create an automated process around this using data? What if I could speed up that process? And fast forward, he's the category leader in a category that never existed in the Forrester Wave. And so, that's 6 years later. So it has to go back, once again, I keep saying the same thing, product and user, not big customers, right? Because big customers are actually people in the organization walking in and out of the organization or doing stuff remote every single day. So you have to nail them first.
Randy, we've got a question from Jesse.
Yes, thanks, Jesse. If I am an enterprise seller and everyone shifts toward product-led growth on the lower cost model, how do I continue to sustain a career on million-dollar deals? Should I be considering other angles? Quick answer I guess I'd have is, you could even take like a Datadog who kind of started in a PLG model, but then as they're starting to upsell and get more traction, then they need to do those kind of enterprise-wide ELAs. So that would be one perspective, and I'm sure Ed has some others.
I would agree with you 1,000%, because look, the ultimate goal for many of these, even Twilio and a bunch of these other developer-first companies, you eventually get enterprise-led deals, right? These are $1 million contracts, but such a different motion when 10, 50, or 100 developers are using the product, and you go in and say, hey, I see 3 different groups using the product. Let me kind of streamline that all together into an enterprise-wide license. Number one. Number two is, I would actually just be steeped in just kind of that journey itself. I would try out as much SaaS software as possible when you're interviewing these new places. I'm a believer that everyone, if they're passionate and curious, they can actually relearn things. So I think a lot of SaaS companies could benefit from the experience of selling these large deals. And what you should do is steep yourself in understanding how this software works, what frictionless looks like, how do you build that motion? And I think together, you can find opportunities, because there's not enough talent out there.
Ed, you started Boldstart with, again, very simple beginnings. I don't know if it was $1 million or some small amount, and now you just raised Fund 5. Talk about that risk reward. A lot of people shy away from that first day, really early stage world because of the enormous risk. They see a lot of those technical founders as, these are science projects, and we have no idea what's going to happen by the time and if they ever can get a product out and get traction. What's drawn you to be this early of a stage investor?
It's the most fun. Look, at the end of the day, I do this because this is freaking fun. And even if I wasn't doing it, I'd be doing it. Number one. Secondly, I have a supportive family. My wife, first and foremost, we had $1 million fund. I didn't take salary for a couple of years, and it was all on the come. And when you're investing in these companies that don't have products, it's going to take 8 to 10 years to even see any liquidity there. So, and then my children too, right? Because I was like, hey, I'm not going to be able to get you this or that, but dad's happy and doing what he wants. So I'd say that's number one. Number two is I don't know, like if you're not fired up, and I would ask you the same question, if you're not fired up every day is different. If you're not fired up every day, loving what you do, I just love this. I love meeting new founders. I love taking the impossible challenge on with them, and embarking on the journey. And by the way, I'm a founder myself. We had to scrape up everything. We had to raise money. I had to build a team. And do all that too. So to me, it's just fun. Like I choose to do this because it's exciting and it's hard. And that's what I like about it.
Randy, one of the questions I ask Ed, and I'm always curious, give me the profile, and you also have a recruiting business, that first sales rep that joins the technical founders. What's the DNA of that first sales rep?
Yeah, I think, as I said before, I think they have to be from a smaller company. If you're just from some big company, that's not going to work. Whether you know the space or not, I'd be interested, some security companies, you have to have a security DNA. You take a Bill Hogan security scorecard, you take a Mark Thurman, Sentinel One. They don't have that per se, security scorecard, but they know the security background, but they have that enterprise DNA, which helps a lot. And then also, I think it's always a bonus if you have relationships, especially in this COVID time. Those are the things that are, of huge value, especially getting those early at-bats.
Ed, I asked you the same question. I said, the two technical founders have gotten some early traction. They got their early users. You actually suggest don't hire a VP. Talk about that. What should be that one of the first couple hires for early stage tech-led kind of ventures?
Yeah, so I either like individual contributors, like maybe 2 kind of quota carrying reps, so you can actually see, is it your product, is it your message, or whatever, you know, in terms of why you're selling kind of net new deals, or a head of that's not afraid to roll up their sleeves, you know, build out kind of the early kind of sales process and learnings, and actually be an IC to start with, but maybe it can grow to 4 or 5 people, and then maybe you give them the opportunity to become a VP of sales. I just have a bias because I've made this mistake before where we thought we had product market fit in one of our companies. And I'll tell you, the company is called Greenplum. And we sold 3 large enterprise contracts. But guess what? It wasn't really working. Well, it worked, but we realized that it would break if we scaled past a certain point. And we had a decision. We hired a VP of sales. And that VP of sales had 4 regions with an SE with each person. There's 12 people on the team. And we knew that we could sell this for the next 18 months. Or we could actually go back to the drawing board, rebuild everything, and shut it all down. And guess what? We made the hard decision, cut the whole sales team, rebuilt it from scratch, knowing that you can't sell something that's not going to scale at some point in time, even though people are buying it. And that lesson was learned the hard way. We spent a lot of money. There's a lot of pain, a lot of blood. So I think a VP of sales is only best when you have true product market fit, which means that, you know, you have the ability to actually get sales from people that aren't friends or family or friends of the investors or friends of the founders. You have referenceable customers. You know exactly who the user persona is of who you're selling to. And there's the beginnings, not fully, but the beginnings of a repeatable sales process in motion. And if you don't have that, a VP of sales ain't going to fix that either. I would rather have a head of product marketing come in and help you define the market, define the product, define your positioning, create those sales literature and everything else. I think that's the more important hire in the early days when it comes to go-to-market.
Randy, Ashley Smith, who's consistently getting some ridiculous wisdom from these live streams, is back, and she has a good question.
Yep. Thanks, Ashley. What trends should I be looking for in enterprise software as a rep, technology-wise, IT security, sales, and MarTech? I'll take one stab at it. Since starting Sales Community, and I could just be ignorant, but I'm amazed this whole sales marketing technology world. So a lot of things that we would kind of had to learn kind of the hard way and develop as a best practice. Now there's just so many great automated tools out there that exist. And also could be a layup for you to talk about Dooley, Ed.
Wow, you just gave me a beach ball to hit out of the park. Yeah, so this is my shirt for Dooley. We just announced a $20 million round of financing, which was a seed round that we led, and then a $17 million A round from some of the best kind of investors, you know, kind of in the space. And I concur with Randy. You know, if there are opportunities to build a true product-led growth motion, which Dooley does. I mean, basically, sales reps find the product. It's not sales ops. And it's the fastest and easiest way to enter data into Salesforce and take notes. It's actually joyful. People spend 2.5 to 3 hours a day in it. More importantly, though, there's a whole workflow built into it. So they can share this and collaborate with your colleagues, whether it be pre-sales or customer success or whatever. And then boom, it's rabid usage at some of the best product-led growth companies. So I would say anything in that space is super interesting. I would say that anything developer first, anything where there's an industry where it's a top-down sale, and you have the opportunity to turn it upside down to a developer first motion, I would check that out as well. And the third part I would say is that we're big believers that in the productivity stack. You know, we're investors in Superhuman and Front and some others that are growing really fast. And I believe that there's this whole new category of companies that is SaaS oriented, where one department may use it, let's just say like product, but then you build this cross-functional collaboration amongst the team. And there's a whole new wave, whether it be Figma in the design space. We have a company called Snyk in the product-centric building space. And there's a whole bunch of others where you have one department, one user. And then even Dooley, for example, starts with a sales rep, and then a number of reps, and then different cross-functional departments. So I think those are very interesting things. We can see that leap from just, you know, one silo to more.
Just as a reminder for our audience, you can type in your questions into the comment section in whatever platform you're joining us from, and we'll see it, and happy to have Ed and Randy take those. So Ed, again, in our podcast interview this morning, I love your comment that everybody sells. So talk about that. Even technical founders, listen, I'm a developer and I'm a coder, and what do you mean I have to sell? So talk about this building this culture that everybody sells from the onset.
Yeah, well, first of all, I've sold myself. I sold Cutco knives, and I was an award-winning Cutco knife salesman. So I got so much endless feedback in college for that. And then I actually had my own window washing business. So I was going selling washing windows, right? So I love the art of selling. And a founder, think about it, they have to be able to tell a story. You can't sell without telling a story, and so I think that's number one. Number two is you got to tell a story and sell your co-founder. How do you get a co-founder on board? How do you get them locked into your vision and your mission? Then you have to sell more employees. Then you have to sell me to raise funding. You're selling every day, no matter what you do, every single day. And then obviously selling to customers, right? So we look for technical founders that have the ability to tell a story. And that story may change over time because they're smart enough to kind of navigate with kind of feedback from other people, but you got to tell a story. So selling is the lifeblood. And I think some of the best companies I see actually, even as they scale, every week they may share like 3 or 4 customer calls that they've recorded, with the permission of the customer, of course, with the whole company to make sure that engineers know what they're building. They're just not cogs in the wheel, but they're building for a customer. And they're understanding kind of the joy that a customer gets from using your product. And that's kind of important.
Randy, I've got a little tougher question for you. Do you believe technical founders, particularly as they grow and scale, really understand the value of, really understand the real impact that the sales leader, sales team, sales organization brings to the company?
Yeah, so I have a person remain nameless, but in my upcoming book, Your Go-To Sales Advisor, somebody has a great write-up on kind of how do you kind of spec out the CEO. And I'd say, and one of her points for sure are, make sure that the CEO appreciates sales and cares. I think everybody can really say it. And where a lot of these startups are, technical founder led, there's definitely some that, say it, and there's others that kind of say it and actually do it. So I think that's always important if somebody's looking at it, for a job in, one of these companies. And also I think tied in with that, as things go further along after a few years, if they're missing numbers, a lot of times I've seen CEOs are, quick to kind of, okay, we're going to go fire the CRO, right? It's their fault versus kind of CEO looking in the mirror and say, product market fit, value prop, customer sat issues, things like that.
Ed, when do you guys step in, or do you step in and really a combination of coach, mentor those technical founders in, here's, I think you mentioned, here's an introduction to a sharp product person. Here's an introduction to an advisor or someone that could be your early kind of team assembly. Talk about how involved you get. Yeah,
so I'll be very clear. When we partner with founders, there's a bias of building that trusted relationship. We want to be there, as a first call with them from the very beginning. And also when they're raising, $300 million down the line, I want them to feel like they can call us with anything. And I'm a big believer that, in the world, bad news doesn't travel and good news travels fast. I'd rather have bad news travel faster and good news travel fast. And that's when, you have a really good relationship where, look, I've been through the journeys. My partners and teams have been through the journeys a long time. And so we're like, okay, shit happens, right? We lost our big enterprise sales customer. Guess what? What are you going to do to recover? Let's figure that out. Let's put a game plan together. So just being calm. And I think, David, we talked about this before. I've tried to distill kind of the relationship a founder has with the VC kind of over time. And I call it the 3 C's. I call it, you have to know when to challenge. And I think you challenge founders when they think things are going amazingly well. Then you ask them, how do you add another 0? How do you actually expand, how do you expand that sale from $200K to $1 million a year later? What are you thinking about down the line? So we need to show them what's 6 to 12 months ahead just because we've seen that movie before. It may not be the same movie, but it's close enough. It's an action movie or it's a comedy, right? You kind of know where that generally goes. You also need to know when to cheer. I find myself cheering when, bad shit happens to the founder. They lose a big deal, they lose a big hire, someone passes in their funding round. So you have to cheer them and lift them up. And then you need to know when to chill. Sometimes they just don't want to hear from you. And you have to kind of understand that cadence where they're just heads down coding and building and don't want to be bothered with any intros at all because it's a distraction. So I think having that empathy is really, really important, whether you do selling, because you have to have customer empathy and know kind of when to push, when not to push. It's the same kind of relationship, right? And because eventually that's a partner. I mean, if you're a good sales rep, you're going to view your customer as a partner, and you're probably going to sell to that person for 20 years. It's not just a one-time thing, right? So think about it for the long term. So anyway, that's just kind of some of the thinking that goes behind how we partner with founders, and that obviously self-selects to a certain kind of founder. You know, we're not a good partner for everyone, but if you're into that kind of stuff, then hopefully we can be a good partner for you.
Randy, the early stage tech companies you've seen, is empathy nature? Empathetic people you've met in these tech companies, are they born that way, or is it nurture? Somewhere along the way, a manager, a mentor has taught them how to be more empathetic.
Yeah, I think whatever profession, a lot of people say, oh, you're born in sales, but I think everything is nurtured, right? I mean, nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to be, maybe some people, super empathetic, right? But these are all specific skill sets that you learn and develop and improve on, you know, all the time, every day, every week, every month, for sure.
I think we've got a great question from one of the Boldstart venture portfolio companies, Bill Hogan.
All right, thanks, Bill. And Bill's got this great series going on his own with the Security Scorecard with lots of sports legends. And he did not tell me to say this, but it's Rick Pitino on March 16th, which I'm sure is going to be great. And I'm sure you can find that on his page or Security Scorecard. But anyway, Bill asks, when it comes to early stage companies, what are the 3 things you expect the founder to have buttoned up for you when they come to you looking for your investment?
Great question. So Bill, hello. First of all, I was talking about you earlier and the amazing work you've been doing with Alex at Security Scorecard, creating a new category. So thanks for the question. You know, it's funny, Bill, a lot of times we'll meet founders before they even start their businesses. And, you know, I was literally just talking to a founder in October, someone that we backed previously, and they're exploring a new space. And they had, you know, an idea about it. And I just said, the biggest problem will be for you is how do you kind of automate that idea? How do you actually build software around it and turn it into a product? And 3 months later, after I made a couple introductions, the founder came back and said, here's my story. You know, I'm going to do A, B, and C. So they came back with a very, you know, focused product, an initial wedge of who that user would be, right? Who that user persona would be. And I said earlier that product and go-to-market thinking have to go hand in hand. So they're going to create an open source product with a specific user persona in mind, with a specific piece of software they're going to give out for free, a very small piece of software. And they had an idea of how that would expand over time. So you got to nail what the product is and why. 2 is the founder was mission driven. It was a pain that they've had for a long time. So they're able to tell a story to get me excited. And the third part for me is I always am a big fan of product velocity and hiring velocity, right? Because if we invest in you and there's no product, I want to know that you're going to be able to have a running start kind of out of the gate. So typically, you know, who's your co-founder, right? You know, and so he had another CTO, kind of technical co-founder they've worked with before. And more importantly, they had 4 more developers ready to go who had been working before. So it's kind of like if I gave you money and you had to go out and find developers, take 6 months, or you start with a running start. So all those things means you can recruit, you can tell a story, you understand the user. And, you know, obviously what that all ties to is I want massive opportunities. It doesn't have to start massive to begin with, because you can't sell a platform, as you all know, because who's going to buy a platform, especially from a startup? You got to start with something very small, but at least walk me through what that vision may look like. I'd like to say market the vision, sell the product.
And talk about, obviously, the title of our podcast this morning was Mission-Driven Founders. You had some really interesting attributes about these people you meet. Talk a little about that. And my question is, do you know that early on, or does it come up as you spend more time with them?
Yeah, so it's a combination of the 2. I view a mission-driven founder. There's 2 kinds of founders in my mind. There's a mission-driven founder and a whiteboard-driven founder. A whiteboard-driven founder, you know, may not have experience in a certain space, and they have a whiteboard and they draw out 4 sectors and say, hey, top right, there's nothing here. I think there's white space here. Let me go find and start something, but I have 0 experience. And I've never really even experienced the pain before, but it looks kind of cool from a top-down perspective. A mission-driven founder starts with the problem. A problem that they've probably experienced for years. It's a pain that's been bugging them. And since we only back technical founders, they want to build it themselves. They want to engineer the problem. So, I mean, even in the case of Bill, Security Scorecard, Alex engineered the problem that he as a CISO faced many, many times. So he understood exactly what the buyer would look like, understood the user journey. And then the question would be, could he have the chops to build out a team and create a new market? So those would be the two differences. And, for example, many times the first time you meet the founder, within the first 5 minutes, the passion they exude about the problem. I mean, passion is everything. I mean, I can tell in a Zoom within the first 5 minutes. I mean, I would love to hear your thoughts. You probably know in the first 5 minutes if a customer is excited about your product or not. It's the same thing. The founder can sell me and get me fired up, and I can just see it. This is their lifelong mission. That means no matter how hard things get, because trust me, I was through, that first internet bubble back in 98, 99, 2000, 2001. And the people who aren't mission driven left the internet or technology completely. But the people who are mission driven, they're in it for the right reasons, which means they're going to go through thick and thin. But we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Seidl, you've led a lot of sales teams. How much of an impact, how much of a role is passion in engaging others, in convincing others to believe in you and believe in your story? And particularly if you don't have the big brand name, right? Nobody has to walk in and say Oracle who or HPE who. But if you're a startup that I've never heard of, how much of a role does passion play in that storytelling?
Huge. And I'd argue it starts with, when you first, whether you're shaking hands or on a Zoom, how you doing today? And if it's anything less than great or fantastic, right, to say, hey, how you doing today? Oh, okay, good. Or, my dog ate my daughter's homework, or, it's like, whatever. It's like, great, right? So from that, passion starts, I think, in the first 3 seconds of that engagement, and that sets the tone. Typically, probably if you're selling to IT executives, they may tend to be more introverts than extroverts, but I think still they like, that passion being a winner. So that's the kind of first domino that falls in there. And then the passion just continues in terms of the excitement that you have for your offering and your mission driven, kind of what you're doing and how you're doing your reference selling, you're excited, just kind of like we're all doing here today.
I believe it comes through in your belief in both your team, your organization, and what it is you're selling. And if anybody shows up, as Randy said, hi, my name is David, I really want to talk to you today about an exciting opportunity, I'd say get out. Because again, you don't believe in it yourself, much less you want me to believe in it. So Randy, Jesse's got an interesting question about sales.
If you're in sales, and by the way, everybody keep questions coming, and also give a shout out to Bob. He said, I think you guys trying to help others is great. Thank you for the knowledge. Thank you for the example you're setting to help others. So Bob, thanks for that. Feel free to ask a question as well. Jesse asks, if you're in sales and like to code, no code, low code, could you see a day where sales professionals become technical founders and seed investments? Probably meant seed investments.
Ed, that's to you. So can sales professionals become technical founders with no code or low code?
I would say yes and no. I mean, I'd like to have a little more meat in the bones in terms of, I'd rather be the investor in a company that is building the platform for no code, low code, where there is a sales, put it this way, sales professionals are great co-founders, right? But I would have a technical co-founder that can really, and at least for us, we like to go really deep in the tech stack. I'd rather have a technical co-founder. I wouldn't want the foundation of my business it being someone else's low code, no code platform, to be honest with you. But by all means, sales professionals should go find and recruit that co-founder, tell the story, get them excited, and find that technical co-founder to build something.
To build on that, where have you found to be the best opportunity to find technical co-founders?
I think just incredible networking, right? I mean, I find that networking with people and getting the APB out, getting the story out, writing about it, maybe throwing yourself out on Twitter, throwing yourself out on LinkedIn, and trying to build that mission that you're behind. And it's just constant networking, finding someone, right? I mean, I don't believe in the founder dating, perspective, right? Because a lot of times you're just thrown together for hours and you decide to be co-founders. That means you haven't been through the thick and thin. In fact, I would hope that if you're a sales professional and you're working in a tech company, that you're friends with some of the engineers, or you're friends with a sales engineer who also is friends with people that are building. Because if you want to start something, if you ever want to start something, be friends with everyone in the org, particularly the people building the product. And those would be the ones that are going to go out there and start companies versus the ones who are just selling and maybe don't think of engineers as important, right? And so I would just build those relationships early.
Randy, we got a question from Tucker.
Yeah, and before we go to his question for you, Nour, so you think about a lot of these questions around kind of smaller companies versus larger companies with your book, Curve Benders, the new one you have coming up. What do you see as differences kind of with the smaller, earlier stage company in terms of the consulting work that you do or what their needs are versus the larger companies?
No question. Thanks for asking. Yeah.
Wendy behind you?
Wendy.
Hey, Wendy.
Yes, on our way to pick up our daughter. Yeah, I wrote in Curve Benders that it's really difficult, I believe, for large, mature organizations to really innovate. They'll do incremental improvements, but if you think of innovation as doing something really new, something different, those are going to typically come from earlier stage companies. And I'm like Ed, I'm really excited for, and I'm very bullish on these founders who have deep subject matter domain expertise. They see a problem that nobody else is addressing. A friend of mine says, you want a definition for brilliance? It's something so obvious that nobody else has thought of, right? And they see that need, and it just gnaws at them. It just, they keep thinking about it. They keep talking to friends about it. They might see less than elegant solutions to it, if any solution at all. And I've also seen, and I get really excited that, they quickly put something together and they're not in a cocoon. They get out there and they get it in front of people. What is, I think Reid Hoffman or somebody else said, if you're not embarrassed by the solution you put out in the market, you've waited too long, right? So getting out there with those ideas and really ascertaining, gauging, is it viable? Is it, and Randy, you said it, does it actually solve a problem? Whether it's a user or an enterprise client, if it's not focused on them, you're just going to really struggle to get traction. And by the way, if Ed doesn't say it, everybody else needs to hear this. The only market traction anybody cares about is a paying customer. Somebody who had the problem and was willing and able to pay you to solve it is what people are going to look for, right?
I would caution one thing, is that a lot of these developer-led businesses and businesses in open source, the biggest problem sometimes I see is that you try to rush to get paying customers too early. And what that does is it reduces the focus on improving your product for that individual user. And as you spend cycles doing SSO and maybe even deploying on-prem to get that $1 million customer, maybe there's only $3 million customers out there, and that's not a big enough opportunity versus showing that you got 10, then 100, then 10,000 developers using it at 1,000 different orgs, right? Or 100 different orgs. And so we really caution founders, particularly when they go and bombs up, is not to charge too early and go for the brass ring too early. I'd rather kind of get there later. And that's something that might be controversial, but in the long run, it really, makes a lot of sense.
Great point. What's the business model on that, Ed? Is it a freemium? Or are you letting the developers use it and just give you feedback on it? Or how do you get the audience engaged? And then how do you prove the business model actually works?
Yeah, so like on an open source play, it's a tried and true method is, you kind of release some code onto GitHub. People start iterating on it. You see the downloads and you see that growing. And then you build a SaaS version. You build a SaaS version, so then people have to register. And you offer more things, maybe a management dashboard. Now they don't have to download it and install it in their and then use the CLI to do things. You remove a lot of the friction. It'd be the equivalent of like MongoDB, where you download and install MongoDB, run it yourself, or the cloud version came out of nowhere over the last 3 years and now doing 60% of the revenue. So there's a tried and true path from going from free code to a hosted SaaS version. And so if you have investors and people that believe and understand, they'll know the journey you're going on. And they'd rather you optimize for as much reach as possible to show that people really care.
And I know it's a broad spectrum, but is there a timeline or what are some of the key milestones or timelines you're looking for to show that traction, to show that validation if it isn't a paid customer?
I would say that there's no timeline. It really takes a lot of time. I guess it's going to take a couple of years. It's going to be drip by drip. It's going to be user by user. Meetup by meetup or Zoom by Zoom, and eventually you start getting the traction. The most important signals, if you're doing that we look for is, obviously the growth in individual users, and then looking at as each individual user uses it, what is the sharing perspective? What's the virality around sharing with other people? So if you see 1, 5, 10, boom, that's exciting, right? And then eventually you say, what does a conversion look like? Look at Dooley, for example, goes in with individual sales reps and gives it away for free for 30 days. So that's more of a freemium model, not on the open source side, but more on the SaaS side. And man, there's rabid usage now. We saw, dozens upon dozens of people banging on the system over the weekends from some of the fastest growing companies out there. And a lot of them started out with just one user, 3 months previously. So that virality amongst individual teams and then going to number of orgs, those would be the most important things to look for.
All right, Randy, back to Tucker. We want to make sure we don't ignore Tucker.
Sorry, Tucker. Awesome story about Cutco knives. How can SDRs early in their career best position themselves when interested in joining early stage companies with technical founders? I guess a couple of things that come to mind for me is, I guess, assuming they're already selling somewhere, really is probably, being passionate about whatever that mission is or whatever that company's doing. Typically, early stage companies like SDRs, because they're kind of low cost labor for, lack of better words, and their work hours can be, rather extreme versus some that are maybe, more experienced people. So I think a lot of times it's probably SDRs really just finding the opportunity and then being aggressive about it. And then just to digress before you answer this, Ed, I know him well from Sun. I'm drawing a blank on his name, who kind of the red eye story.
Bill Cook.
Yeah, Bill Cook. Yeah, Bill Cook.
Yeah.
So you think about that. So it's not just an interview, but you kind of, how you interview is how you want to be able to, show, hey, this is how I behave if there's deal, if there's business on the line. So maybe tell that story first and then answer Tucker's question. Yeah.
So Bill Cook was the head of, started out selling at Sun Microsystems and then eventually became head of $1 billion plus division at Sun, on the storage side, storage software. And he was interviewing to be CEO of Greenplum, which eventually went on to be sold to EMC and then went public as Pivotal Software and was worth billions. And I remember talking to Bill because I think Randy mentioned earlier is that, you look for startup DNA. You may not necessarily be from a startup, but you look for startup DNA. And that is also a passion. It's a will to do whatever it takes to get it done. So I was interviewing Bill. I was like, Bill, you sound great. You've got great experience. You seem hungry. Like, you've never worked in a startup before. Like, how are you going to handle not having an assistant? Maybe things aren't fully baked, and he goes to me, he goes, Ed, what are you doing tomorrow morning? And so mind you, Bill's in California, I'm in New York. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, let's have breakfast. It was like 5 o'clock, East Coast time. Bill hops on a red eye. I meet him for 7:30 breakfast. We meet for 2 hours. And then I was like, man, this guy's going to do anything it takes to become, CEO of a startup. And guess what? He absolutely crushed it. Now he's CEO of Yugabyte, which just raised, I think, $40 or $50 million today from Lightspeed. And yeah, so that's kind of the passion and energy that you can bring to the table, like Randy says. The other thing I would say, by the way, is if you're an sales development representative, be steeped in startups. Be curious. Like if I were kind of meeting with you, or if I'm a founder, I'd ask, what are your 3 favorite startups and why? And it's easy to find the unicorn startups. I mean, they're almost not like startups anymore, but find me 3 interesting startups and be able to articulate to me why you're excited about them in the spaces that they're at. And then, you know what, if you find these things, you see that they get the Series A round done, you can imagine if they're closing a Series A and raising $20 million, they're probably hiring sales reps. So reach out to them on LinkedIn, go look at their job boards, be really aggressive. So you have to be forward thinking and proactive. And the startup news is everywhere. You can easily find it.
Yeah. I want to also
reiterate, sorry, that their startup DNA that both Randy and Ed have brought up unequivocally have scrappy, have creative, have resourceful embedded in them. That's exactly what startups have to have in you as an individual contributor. Is instead of waiting for somebody to hand you a platter of vegetables, you got to plant your own garden. You've got to be scrappy. And again, I want to reiterate, creative enough to go figure it out. Go figure out whatever answers you don't have. Because if you're waiting for something, startup is probably not the right place for you. Randy, sorry, I interrupted your thought.
Yeah, and what's great with the generation these days, it's very acceptable to go somewhere for a year and do that several times. When I was growing up, if you're not somewhere for 5 years, there's something wrong with you. So my daughter's at Oracle, so she didn't listen to me. So she's doing the big company SDR thing. But for those that are out of college or, listening, it's, kind of doing that jump, go try it. If it works, great. If not, no big deal. And it gives you, I started EMC 33rd employee. So the view that we had from kind of what all these different functional departments are, operations, finance, accounting, and we walk over to the engineering to ask them a question, walk over to finance, say the customer has a problem with this bill. It just gives you such a great perspective in terms of business. So you almost get a mini MBA of sorts.
By the way, I am ridiculously curious of Ed's secret with that dog. Has anybody else noticed how good
we saw it moving before, just so people know. So it's not a animal.
Ed, are you a dog whisperer? How do you get that dog trained so well?
He's an older guy. He's full of love. And what's funny about Sparky is he knows when to play and knows when to chill. So when he just sits in here, oh, there he is. Hello, guy.
Of course, his name is Sparky, right?
Yeah,
what else do you want?
Yeah, and so he's just chilling right now. He's just absorbing it all. He's going to give me some feedback later.
I love it. So back to our regular scheduled programming. One of the things, Ed, that you talked about was you really like new category creations. Talk about that and what does that look like?
Yeah, I love kind of venturing into the unknown with founders and the idea of not only creating new product from scratch and being kind of a small part in helping them do that, but also creating massive new categories. I find the bigger the challenge, it means the bigger the opportunity for everyone. And the more fun it will be, actually. I love it when people are, I have a chip on my shoulder. I love it when people are naysayers. And you're going to get more naysayers when you're creating new categories than not. And I almost find it easier to kind of go after new categories versus incumbents, because there's no kind of feature parity you need to build for. Typically what you're building for is replacing kind of internally built tools or something that they've done by hand themselves. And so all that means that if you can do it right, the opportunity is absolutely off the charts. And it's probably the most fun you can ever have, is putting a new, condiment on the grocery shelf, right? If you know what I mean.
Are you ever concerned in new categories that, once it gets traction, there's much bigger players? The Facebooks and the Twitters and the LinkedIns are going to sweep in, integrate that into their existing feature. Now your startup is not struggling to compete with a much bigger player.
All I know is that if I was worried about kind of all the big players, I shouldn't be in the business. I think passion and speed, the ability to build quickly and get it out the door quickly means that you can outmaneuver a lot of the big folks. I mean, even look at AWS. They have hundreds of, I can't even keep track of all the products they have over time. But you know what they're really good at is fast following. But they're not really good at leading a market. And in fact, when AWS kind of announces something, I think that only means that they're validating the space. And it's usually a version 0.5. And, if you have a product kind of in the category they're coming at, you can actually sell into multiple clouds. You probably have a better UI. It's probably easier to use. So if anything, bring it on, right? And that's the other thing. That's the other fun part of it. It's another challenge, but that's what makes this business exciting is to go after them and be that David versus that Goliath.
And Randy's son, big baseball player. My son plays lacrosse. They always play better against tougher competitors.
Yep.
And I use that same analogy with startups, right? When you're in a competitive market, I think you're gonna be a lot more focused. You're gonna be a lot more scrappy. You're gonna come up with features or functionality or the needs of that user that are gonna set you apart. So Randy, we've got a former Tech Sales Insight podcast guest and a friend of ours, Peter Bell, has a question.
Absolutely. So Peter, thank you so much. That is definitely a dated picture, but anyway, it looks like from Fenway Park. What new category is Ed most excited about now?
As much as I want to say new categories, we get in so early. I just want to shine a flashlight on areas that we may be interested that are broad enough, and then I rely on the founders who are the ones innovating and building stuff. Versus like downstream in the Series A or B, it's easier to follow, the seed investors to see what's happening. So anything developer first, I think is super exciting. Anything kind of in that productivity space, where you can turn kind of an individual user in one function to a cross-platform, cross-departmental, a la Figma is super interesting. One area I would say, Peter, is infrastructure as code. I think, and that's kind of matches DevOps and developers and kind of streamlines that together. We have a company called env0.com. And what it does is it balances out two needs. One is it balances out the need for companies to have some type of policy and governance around who can deploy cloud assets and how and when. And then also balances the need for developers to have self-service capabilities. And there's companies out there like HashiCorp, which are absolutely growing very quickly and crushing it right now, and Pulumi and some others. But this would sit on top of those systems and make it 100 times easier for the end user to use, which is the developer, while still giving that governance capability. And the infrastructure as code space is exploding. The other space I would talk about would be, I think DevOps is a big word, but I think SRE is a new DevOps. That's site reliability engineering. If you see, for example, Target, I think, doubled their sales, a percentage of sales in e-commerce year over year. Same with Best Buy, just came out this week. Guess what? Keeping lights on 24/7, it becomes more and more important, and it's harder and harder to do because you have distributed microservices everywhere. And so we have a company called Jelly.io, Jeli.io, which was started by one of the senior chaos engineers at Netflix, and then head of chaos engineering at Slack, to help companies learn from their incidents. I.e., shit happens and shit fails all the time, but how do you make sure it doesn't happen again? And that's really hard to do. So I think there's going to be a ton of investment in terms of helping people keep the lights on moving forward.
Randy, you want to take the trash talking from Bill Hogan or the question from Ashley Smith?
No. We got
I think Billy's alluding that I was a lacrosse player myself. I played at Harvard undergrad, and I played a little pro indoor for a little bit. So yeah, I love it.
How lame is the Ivy League for canceling spring sports?
It's terrible. I mean, that's 2 years in a row that they haven't been able to play. It's been such a bummer.
So question.
So now you totally lost me. And also too, as an side ed, I don't know if I ever introduced you and Peter, but you two are kind of two peas in a pod, and I think could definitely do some damage together.
I think it was either you or Peter McKay that introduced us, and we had a fantastic chat actually.
Yeah, so you guys, I think, could definitely do some great things. Anyway, thanks, Bill Hogan. Let's see here. So Ashley, how can we get more women-led founders and diversity in technology?
Yeah, all of us, including the three of us here, can do more around that. We hired two kind of women partners in our team. One is a woman named Natalie Ledbetter, who is was chief people officer at a company called Stash, grew it from 7 to 300 people. Then we just hired a woman named Ellen Chisa, who is a former founder of one of our dev tooling companies. And guess what? Their networks have a lot of women in them. And so the reason we did that was because we're a big proponent of having diversified teams, not only from sex, but also from color and just even economic diversity, right? I think it's super important. So typically what happens is what we like to say is, and this is a big part of even when we invest, we believe that diverse teams are going to build better companies and actually have much different thought to kind of contribute. And if you're not hiring diversity within the first 10 people, then it's hard to actually hire afterwards because you've already set the culture. And another thing might be, for example, when you do a VP search, maybe in a VP of engineering search, where typically it's usually male dominated, we'll tell a recruiter, find us, as many women as you do men. We want to buy and find us as many folks who are diverse candidates as possible to begin with, and maybe focus on that alone to see if we can find someone absolutely amazing there. And it might take an extra month, but at least we want to surface that. So we've brought some amazing women engineers to companies like Harbor. Nour, as I mentioned, is a founder that she'd never been a founder before that we backed at Jelly.io. So she has just amazing chops. Look, I could care less from a VC perspective. What you look like, I just want to know that you're passionate and you're building something cool and you have the experience and you have the pain. Like Nour was actually going to earn her master's in incident analysis, not from software, because incident analysis in software is a new thing, but she was learning about it from nuclear reactors and other things, right? So right, think about that. Chernobyl. What is the incident analysis process when something happens and an alarm goes off and things break? I don't know if you saw the HBO documentary, but learning from things like that, from real mission critical things, can then help you apply that to software itself. So I think it has to start from the CEO. It has to start from the early investors, and it has to start with the recruiters as well to kind of make that a priority. And there's so much more we can do. And I'm passionate about this, as you can tell. It's
Randy,
important to me.
Talking about very competent, very capable women executives, our guest on next week's podcast on live stream, Jennifer Haas, has a question.
Absolutely. Good to see you, Jennifer. What are the biggest red flags that you look for in early stage startups to help you mitigate your portfolio risk?
Okay, so I'm thinking through that one. Well, I think about, since we're getting so micro and so atomic, I would just say a couple of things. Make sure that whatever your milestones are from the time you get your funding to raising your next round of funding, match kind of what you're trying to do as a business. And I'll give you a good example. People end up chasing what's sexy in the markets. And right now what's sexy in the markets is anything that's developer-led or product-led, i.e. Zoom or Twilio or things like that, are getting the attention. They're getting much higher multiples in the market than they are than traditional companies, right? And so what we end up finding is founders that might, for example, sell a security solution. And it should be a top-down solution. There's just maybe no way it could be a bottom-up developer solution, but they say they're a developer-led product. So they have this pitch, I'm a developer-led security solution. And then on slide 15, first of all, they don't have any experience kind of doing that as well. And they weren't even kind of developers. Maybe they're a VP of engineering, but they weren't even coding. But slide 15 comes around and says, these are my milestones. I'm going to get 5 enterprise customers. I'm going to hire 20 people. And then the question you ask is like, where are the developers? I don't see any metric around getting number of users, number of developers, number of orgs. So, I think what I'm trying to say is build your company, the way that your customers would actually want to buy your product. Maybe you may change it. Then tell me the reason why you're going to create this developer-led motion in a top-down world about how you're going to change it, how you're going to win the user love. But don't build it because you think the markets want it or you'll get a higher valuation or anything like that. So that's how I would answer that question.
All right, Randy, Jack Bello, is that our next question?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. How do you look for marketing leaders of startups? And I guess also I'd kind of segue into, what are your thoughts on kind of the sales marketing relationships?
Yeah, so I would say marketing leaders of startups, typically, we'll have founder-led startups. They're technical founders. One person becomes more the product person. The other person, is obviously the person building out the engineering team. And typically what you'll find is that as you get through your first 3, 4, 5 kind of customers, maybe if you're going bottom up, you have hundreds of users, but you're actually turning them into customers. I find the biggest hole is not demand gen, but it's product marketing. And I think about product marketing as an understanding of what your value proposition is. So that goes back to Randy's point earlier, helping define the value proposition. 2 is building the sales collateral to help, folks actually explain the value proposition, update the website. 3 is understanding your positioning in the market. 4 is doing the content marketing. Because I find that when you're creating new categories, I always view it as kind of hunting for dodo birds. I mean, I think dodo birds exist. I don't know. Are they extinct or they exist? I think they exist, but there's only 1 or 2 of them. And so when you're creating a new category and you're calling on, all these Fortune 1000, you're hunting for dodo birds, right? Because you're trying to find the needle in the haystack, and it's hard to find. But content marketing will draw them in. But that'll take 6 months, 9 months to kind of build the content out. Get that machine rolling, get the positioning rolling. I think that's more important in the early days, and then you can bring on the demand gen later, because you can't demand gen something if you're not actually in the right categories or the right user persona. So, and then what we do is typically, people's networks will find people, on the product marketing side, or then we'll kick off searches as well. I think recruiting firms, executive recruiters are fantastic at what they do. And I'm a huge fan of having our portfolio companies use them to help scale their businesses, because talent is really, really hard to get.
Randy, in our last minute or so, how about a quick shout out to the sales community for our audience?
Absolutely. And Ed, I just remind you, I also have a recruiting business, Top Talent Recruiting. So happy to help.
I know you do, which is why I'm bringing it up.
Yeah. So anyway, certainly a great hour here that we had. Love the questions, love the engagement. Ed, great to get exposure to you and your group and your portfolio companies and some of your leaders that have joined on here. And sales community, you can go salescommunity.com. The idea is learn more so you can sell more. There's lots of great content. We have a lot of these webinars we've done before, a lot of great ones coming up, including Jennifer Haas next week. There's a series called Design Your Life, where we have things that are a little off core from sales, talking about your health, your personal branding, personal goal setting, areas like that. With Nour, we also host once a month called Your 10X. How do you get kind of 10X, or maybe we should call it 100X kind of improvement based on some best practices in his various books that he's done. We've got lots of great engagement, and one of the biggest value adds is just a kind of topic library. So whatever it is that you're looking for, remote selling, how can I leverage LinkedIn? And of course, networking is always a given. So if you're not a member yet, please go check it out. And we still have a limited time 30-day free trial, so no brainer to do that.
So on behalf of Randy Seidl, I'm David Nour. Thanks for joining us. Each Wednesday, we'll release a Tech Sales Insight podcast. So I hope you'll subscribe wherever you consume podcasts or at salescommunity.com/events. Our guest next week will be Jennifer Haas, EVP and CRO. So hopefully you'll join us next Wednesday, March 10th at noon Eastern. Sure. Jennifer will be our guest. Yep. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. Ed, great to see you.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Appreciate it.